in 1989, we had the Convention of the Rights of the Child, and its anniversary today. Happy birthday to something beautiful that has been used quite a lot, but we can make a lot more use of it when we actually start looking at how to bring it right into the heart of our educational practice. So there's also a general commentary together with this beautiful document that helps to clarify things. And the very first general comment that addresses Article 29 of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Child, or UNCRC, around the aims of education, explains that approaches that do no more than seek to superimpose the aims and values of children's rights onto the existing system without encouraging any deeper change are clearly inadequate. And this makes it clear that it's not enough to paste respect for children's rights over an existing education provision. But isn't this pretty much what all of us do when we really think about it? Next slide, please. So we will have a public school or a private school or a little cottage school, maybe an alternative education setting or even home education plan. And we put all our attention on what we're going to make sure the children learn and how we'll check whether they've learned it. Maybe we're going to make sure they can read and do maths, and we're going to use standardized tests, or maybe we're going to make sure they learn yoga and organic gardening, and we're going to get them to make lap book portfolios, or maybe we're even going to make sure they learn how to be free, independent, critical thinkers, or good community members, or good at emotional self-regulation, and we're not going to assess them because they can assess themselves. Whatever our plans are, we spend lots of time and effort making those plans. And then we get started and we roll out our wonderful plan for their education. And there they are in front of us. And we treat them, we treat them however we are used to treating children. That's usually either a continuation of how we ourselves were treated as children, or an attempt to react against how we were treated as children. But it ends up pretty much being luck of the draw. Some of our colleagues or co-parents will treat young people with respect. Others might not even realize that they don't. Some people might think they're being very kindly and protective, where young people are actually experiencing that as patronizing, offensive, and stifling. Others might think they're being firm and fair, whereas that's being experienced as abusive and cruel. And some of our colleagues will even openly, deliberately, consciously treat young people as inferiors who should defer to and obey their elders and betters. So given that all of these adults are still actually sticking to the planned program and are officially helping the young people learn what they were meant to learn, there's actually a limit to what can be done about it all. And that's what we're struggling with today. So this is what happens when we put education first and then try to add respect and fulfillment for young people's rights. If you can just click that there. That's what happens. We end up with something that just doesn't make for a stable balance. So what we're saying with the whole right-centric education concept is, what if, instead of thinking about what we want them to learn, how we'll find out how well they're learning it, or even starting with thinking about all the wonderful ways we're going to support their learning process, what if instead, let's see the next little equation there, what if we started by thinking how we are going to treat them, and then letting education emerge from that? Then we get something that balances really differently, that's got a very different level of foundation and roots. Not everyone realizes that human rights are actually all about how we treat each other. It's easy to confuse rights and entitlement, and sometimes people focus on rights as if there's something that each of us has that we can make demands about. But in fact, if we go to the next slide, In fact, human rights actually offer the best way we have figured out to date to spell out the details of that famous ancient golden rule. They give us a practical guide on how to treat ourselves and others with respect as full human beings. Rights are a guide for how to treat each other well, even when we don't understand each other and even when we don't agree. So when we put rights first and at the center and then grow education around that core, we get a very different result. All of the other plans that we need to make can often start falling into place as a direct result simply of putting rights at the center. And this is because rights are actually largely determined and defined by all of the conditions, all of the things that we need as humans for our well-being and thriving. A person who has all of their human rights respected and fulfilled is a person set up to thrive. On the other hand, when our rights are impacted and to the extent that they're not fulfilled, it becomes hard to thrive. Now let's add in another link, because part of human thriving is learning and growing. We know this instinctively. So for example, if we see a child who's not growing, not learning, we will say this child is not thriving. But on the other end of the scale, let's look at a senior citizen who spends lots of active time growing their connections, learning new things. We're going to assume that person's thriving in a way that we won't assume that for another senior citizen just lying in bed. The fact is that, learning and thriving are so deeply interconnected. So looking at the whole of that connection, when we ensure that a child's rights are met, that sets them up for thriving, which includes setting them up for learning. In other words, using the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child to help us check how we are treating young people and making that the foundation of our education spaces and interactions ensures that children will thrive, which sets them up to learn. And this creates really solid roots and foundations for all of our endeavors.